If you pull that gun, they'll scrape you off this pavement. Two ruthless debt collectors cornered a terrified dancer in a dark alley, threatening to kidnap her sick mother. They demanded their money, completely ignoring the quiet man standing right beside her. That was their final fatal mistake. The man was Roman Valente, the ultimate mafia king of the city, and the very boss they secretly worked for. In a single second, Roman's men drew their weapons, and the hunters instantly became the hunted.
Let us open this dark chapter together, you and I. Picture the cheap neon bleeding through the heavy smog on the 91st block. This is a filthy club running on unhinged impulse, the air thick with the sour smell of spilled liquor. Through our camera, we find Roman Valente sitting in the shadows. He is entirely motionless, radiating the terrifying stillness of a man who deals in violence. He is completely indifferent to the writhing bodies around him. But then, she steps into his view. Beneath a thick mask of stage makeup, her terror is a physical, living thing. You can see her heart battering against her ribs like a trapped bird. It is a harsh reminder that the most profound turning points in our lives often happen in the ugliest places. Right when we stop looking for the light. Watch how the camera lingers on her trembling hands. Every slow sway of her hips is a desperate survival tactic, a hollow pantomime of seduction. There is zero joy in her eyes, only the empty echo of deep psychological torment. She is dancing on the edge of a cliff, performing just to delay the inevitable cruelty of the men watching her. Roman sees right through the theatrical smoke. He recognizes the rigid dread of a bird, with clipped wings, a captive holding her breath in a cage of strange faces. Let us pause and think about this together. The harsh truth we must all face is that survival often forces innocent souls to wear the darkest disguises just to see tomorrow. We do what we must when the world leaves us no other options. The camera tightens on Roman. His dark eyes track her every move, entirely devoid of the drunken lust poisoning the room. He reads the tense lines of her body, watching how she subconsciously leans toward the distant exit. Then the tension snaps. A heavy patron lunges forward, his rough hand violently grabbing her fragile wrist. The shift in Roman is a microscopic earthquake. A single muscle in his jaw tightens. His relaxed posture evaporates into lethal readiness. As the young woman tries to pull away, her face shatters with a silent, paralyzing horror. She knows exactly what happens to girls who fight back in a place like this. Roman clearly sees the invisible chains wrapping around her throat. It reminds us that the heaviest shackles in our world are never made of iron, but of pure fear. Roman rises slowly from the velvet booth. There is no wild rage in his motion, only the chilling grace of a predator who knows he owns the dark. The atmosphere in the club instantly suffocates. The blaring music fades as every lesser man in the room subconsciously shrinks away from the approaching shadow. He steps up to the stage with a devastating calm, a stillness born from a lifetime of terrible violence. His voice is barely a whisper, yet it cuts clean through the noise. He tells the man to let go. The drunken fool, blinded by his own fragile ego, refuses to yield. Roman does not raise his voice or throw a frantic punch. He simply grips the man, applying surgical pressure until the patron drops to his knees. We learn here that true power never needs to scream to make the world listen. The girl stumbles backward into the harsh glare of the stage lights, her chest heaving with frantic breaths. She stares at Roman with wide, shattered eyes, caught in the terrifying realization that her rescuer might just be a deadlier wolf. Then Vincent Moreau, the club owner, slides into the frame like a slick disease. He pastes on a greasy smile, offering free bottles to smooth over the disruption. But Roman ignores him entirely. His cold gaze remains anchored to the trembling woman on the stage. Beneath her cheap glitter and smeared mascara, he sees a soul eroded by endless nights of cruelty. It is a heartbreaking truth of life that those who suffer the most often hide behind the brightest paint. hoping the world will not hear their desperate cries. We are about to witness the absolute tragedy of human devaluation. Roman turns his cold gaze to Vincent, his voice dropping like an anvil on the room. He demands to know her price. You can see the greedy gears turning behind the manager's sweating forehead, caught between his love for money and his terror of the killer standing before him. But the sickness of greed wins out. Vincent names an astronomical sum. Without a flinch, Roman reaches into his coat and tosses down thick bundles of cash, paying double just to crush the air out of the room. Stick with me here, because this matters. The darkest atrocities rarely occur in hidden cellars. They happen under bright lights, sustained by the silence of cowards who gladly look away when the price is right. Vincent snaps his fingers, barking a harsh order for the girl to go with the man who just bought her. For a suffocating moment, we watch her paralyzed frame. When she finally chokes out a desperate refusal, the greasy mask falls right off Vincent's face. Humiliated in front of a truly dangerous man, his fake hospitality morphs into pure venom. The young woman clings to a cold metal stage pole, her knuckles bone-white, crying out that she is just a dancer, not property. Roman watches this tragic display without moving a single muscle. He sees the absolute truth now. She is a prisoner drowning in an ocean of organized cruelty. This teaches us a deeply human lesson. Courage is not always a loud roar. Sometimes, courage is just a terrified whisper, clinging to the edge of a stage. Roman steps into the harsh stage light, towering over her trembling frame. His low voice cuts through her panic, laying out the brutal reality of what happens if she stays in this hellhole. For a split second, her sorrow sparks into fierce anger. She glares up at him, demanding to know what fresh nightmare awaits if she walks out that door. Before Roman can offer a sliver of safety, two massive thugs emerge from the shadows by the rear exit. You and I can see the immediate devastation in her eyes. All color drains from her face. Her brief defiance crumbles into absolute, breathless submission. The real monsters have arrived. It is a harsh reminder that true despair hits when we finally realize the walls we built to protect ourselves have become our permanent prison. The heavy shadow of organized cruelty hangs over the room. She slowly steps down from the platform, moving like a broken puppet on fraying strings. Standing just inches away, Roman sees the angry red marks blossoming on her delicate wrist. He catches the faint scent of cheap soap on her skin, an innocent detail in a room built on sin. He softly asks for her name. Serafina, she whispers. He locks that name deep in his mind, planting the first seed of a twisted bond that blooms when a savior is just as dangerous as the captor. Vincent weakly tries to stall them, but Roman freezes his blood with a single, deadly stare. The time to walk out is now. A vital lesson we must all learn is that hesitation in the face of total darkness is really just another form of surrender. Let us pause and look at her together. Serafina casts a frantic glance toward the squalid dressing rooms. Her nervous system is screaming, caught in the grip of relentless trauma. Roman sees the flutter of her eyes and asks about her belongings. She whispers that she does not have enough money, a tragic confession from a girl locked in survival mode. The club's enforcers step forward, wrapping the scene in intimidation. You see a flicker of hope in her eyes, crushed instantly by years of dark conditioning. She truly believes salvation is just a beautiful lie. When Roman tells her to move, she searches his stony face for the familiar cruelty she expects from men. This shows us how deep trauma teaches the wounded to fear the open door even more than the cage itself. The camera focuses on Roman's chilling stoicism. He radiates a dangerous power completely absent of the filthy lust poisoning the club. This quiet restraint leaves Serafina deeply disoriented. He casually declares that the monsters by the door will not touch her tonight, silencing the manager with a simple glacial tilt of his head. Yet, right in the middle of this rescue, Serafina drops to her knees to gather her scattered, crumpled bills. She clings to the dirty cash as if someone else's survival depends entirely on it. Her trembling chin raised high to hide her immense terror. It is a powerful reminder that true dignity is often found in the most desperate quiet acts. We desperately hold on to the smallest pieces of control when our world is falling apart. Notice how Serafina clings to her last shred of agency. Even drowning in this neon hell, she refuses the filthy terms of her purchase. But Roman flips the script, tossing down more cash. He makes a terrifyingly poetic distinction, telling her he only bought her time, not her soul. It is a brilliant, dark manipulation. He acts as the noble savior while keeping the invisible chains firmly in his own hands. The dead silence in the room crowns him as the undisputed king. He turns and walks away. For 3 agonizing seconds, Serafina is frozen in the blinding lights. A sharp movement from the thugs near the exit forces her hand, and she finally steps into his shadow. We must always remember that true freedom is incredibly rare. Sadly, the broken often just trade one terrifying cage for another. Step into this scene with me and watch how the atmosphere violently pivots. This is no longer a simple exit, it is a tactical extraction. Roman's guards form an impenetrable wall, standing as a living monument to his absolute power. Under the flickering neon, Serafina practically runs, her trembling hands betraying her raw panic. Roman orders her to stay close, offering a fragile illusion of safety in a corridor thick with cheap perfume and desperate choices. The other girls watch her leave. Some burn with envy, while others hold back tears, recognizing the tragic exchange of one cage for another. It is a harsh truth we all learn eventually. Sometimes running away simply means walking into a much darker room. Roman catches every single glance, his dark eyes missing absolutely nothing. We have seen this tragic play unfold before, the weak man desperately trying to bargain with the wolf. Vincent steps into the frame, nervously calling Serafina a liability. Roman does not even bother to raise his voice. He simply tilts his head, returning the threat with a quiet promise of absolute violence, and Vincent shrinks back into the shadows. As Roman and Serafina step into the freezing alley, the sudden silence is deafening. Serafina freezes. Her stalkers knew exactly which door she would take. 2 men emerge from the pitch black, standing with the terrifying patience of hungry predators. To them, she is just property. The cruelest lesson of the underworld is quite simple. Abusers always expect their victims to remain completely broken and afraid to fight back. Notice how the camera pushes in as Roman steps smoothly between the trembling girl and the thugs. He does not shout or puff out his chest. He simply stands his ground, and the street turns to ice. When the enforcer dares to challenge him, Roman's lethal nature bleeds into the dim light. With a terrifying calm, he declares that every soul in this city belongs to him. Watch Thug's face fall the second he recognizes the man he is dealing with. His arrogant posture crumbles into instant fear. Roman looks back at Serafina, seeing the heavy weight of trauma pulling her down. He asks for the exact number of her debt, turning her nightmare into a transaction. Life teaches us a sobering lesson. The most dangerous monsters in our world do not roar, they simply whisper in the dark. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Roman pushes the men to explain exactly what happens if she fails to pay. The thug spits out a thinly veiled threat about someone else paying the price. The audio drops away here, focusing entirely on the sudden sharp catch in Serafina's throat. Roman hears it instantly. He has found her ultimate weak point, her mother. All of Serafina's hard, defensive armor shatters into pieces. She is not fighting for herself. She is bleeding to protect someone helpless. It is one of the most tragic facts of human nature, teaching us that we will gladly walk through fire for the people we love, completely forgetting to save ourselves. Roman cuts the thug down with a soft voice, cementing his dark dominance over the alley. Roman raises a single hand, ordering his armed guard to stand down. He craves the slow, tense theater of this exact moment. "Who do you work for?" he asks, his voice cutting cleanly through the damp air. The thin man's arrogant smile finally breaks. "A man who will not like being interrupted," the thug replies. Roman takes one measured step forward, swallowing the remaining light. "Then tell him he is already interrupted." The alley falls completely silent. Behind him, Serafina is visibly trembling, trapped in a waking nightmare. For months she has danced until her feet bled, hiding dark bruises from her mother. She survived purely on stolen breaths and dirty dollar bills. The lesson here is cruel but honest. Exhaustion eventually breaks even the strongest human spirit. Instead, a highly dangerous emotion washes over her pale face. That emotion is hope. Life teaches us a bitter truth. Hope is often what destroys us when it arrives before the storm has truly passed. Roman slowly turns his dark gaze to her, asking if these are the men threatening her. She freezes, her deep trauma choking her words, before finally whispering the name Victor Cade. In this criminal underworld, Victor is a known disease, feeding on desperate women with fake debts. Roman has his own twisted morals, and he deeply hates this cheap cruelty. "How much?" Roman demands, his voice sharp and cold. Serafina pulls her purse tightly against her chest like a fragile shield. "I do not know any more," she cries out softly. "Every single time I pay, they change the rules just to break me." Notice how the framing positions Roman here. He stands like a dark god in a world where fear is the only accepted currency. Serafina is drowning under her father's past mistakes, totally trapped. Roman steps closer to the enforcers, his body language perfectly calm, effortlessly claiming her as his own. When a thug foolishly reaches for a gun, the tension violently snaps. Roman does not even pull a weapon. Instead, he drops his voice to a chilling, hollow whisper. It is a brilliant psychological trick meant to freeze a man's beating heart. He promises to end their lives without a single drop of emotion. The thug's hands slowly come up empty. Stick with me, because this exact moment of terrifying rescue is where the quiet poison of a trauma bond truly begins to spread. The thugs quickly back away, leaving Serafina with a silent, hateful glare. The very second they vanish, her survival adrenaline simply turns off and her knees buckle. Roman reaches out to catch her, and her entire body violently flinches. It is truly heartbreaking to watch. The tragic reflex of a girl who expects every human touch to bring pain. When he lets her go and promises not to hurt her, her broken spirit finally speaks up. She whispers that he bought her. Roman smoothly spins the narrative, telling her he merely paid to open a locked door. We all want a savior, but the cruel lesson here is that the devil often wears the face of a rescuer. She desperately wants to feel safe in his shadow, unaware she has planted her feet where dark, dangerous obsessions grow. This scene paints a terrible picture of a trapped soul. Serafina's voice trembles as she mentions the danger to her mother. Roman does not offer any warm human comfort. Instead, he coldly states that the entire syndicate now answers to him. It is the chilling arrogance of a powerful man who looks at known murderers and sees only minor insects. The camera lingers on Serafina as she watches him walk toward his waiting car. Is she merely trading a filthy cage for a golden one? The tragedy of human survival teaches us that we rarely choose true freedom. We simply grab the hand that keeps us breathing until tomorrow. Exhausted and completely out of viable options, she slowly follows him into the dark night, unknowingly handing over the very last broken pieces of her free will. Before stepping into the car, Serafina casts one last haunted look back at the hell she is leaving behind. The heavy door shuts with a solid thud, sealing them inside a quiet, leather-scented bubble. She sits completely frozen, her knuckles turning white as she clutches her cheap bag like a life preserver. She is bracing for his cruel demands. But Roman plays a masterstroke of psychological control. He does absolutely nothing. The silence stretches out, growing heavy and cold. He sits in the shadows, letting his dark eyes trace her trembling frame. The lesson we learn here is that true power never has to announce itself. By giving her no rules, he leaves her entirely lost, watching her not as a romantic fantasy, but as a terrified bird locked inside a brand new cage. The passing streetlights drift across her skin as Roman silently takes her apart with his gaze. He notes her torn dress, the deep bruising on her wrists, and the chipped nail polish of a girl who has fought far too hard for too long. His eyes lock onto her anchor, the crumpled bag of cash. When he asks about the money, her shoulders immediately snap up in defense. She admits she only has $1,200 against a crushing demand of $25,000 by sunrise. Roman processes this with the cold speed of an apex predator. He sees the ugly truth hidden behind the impossible numbers. The cruel reality of life is that some debts are designed strictly to drown you. They built a mountain she could never climb, slowly breaking her will until she handed over her soul. Let us look at this final realization together, you and I. When Roman asks what happens if she fails to pay, Serafina whispers her deepest fear. Her mother, a terrifying shadow, passes over Roman's face. Out of habit, Serafina immediately blames herself, assuming he is judging her for not going to the police. But Roman dismisses the law completely. He coldly states that half the badges in his city belong to him. His city, that possessive phrase, hangs in the heavy air. We watch the tragic gears turning in Serafina's exhausted mind. She remembers the armed men bowing in the dirt. The hard lesson hits her like a physical blow, reminding us all that there are no fairy tales here. She was never rescued by a kind stranger. She was simply claimed by the biggest monster of them all. Let us look at this opening frame together. The camera lingers in the heavy shadows of the car, where Serafina's breath catches in her throat. Streetlights slice across her terrified face as she demands his name. Roman sits, swallowed by the dark, his voice a low rumble. He studies her with unblinking calculation, lacking the animal hunger she expected. With one quiet command, he orders his men to secure her mother's clinic. That single sentence shatters her years of lonely survival. Tears blur her vision, and she fights them back, terrified to show a single crack. But Roman catalogs every tremor of her breaking spirit. It is a harsh truth of human nature. The heaviest walls we build to protect ourselves often crumble the fastest when someone finally offers a genuine place to hide. Roman leans forward, the heavy leather seat creaking. He tells her it is completely fine to be terrified. By validating her survival instinct, he begins building a quiet, deeply dangerous bridge between them. His voice carries the cold resonance of a man familiar with absolute ruin, and this dark empathy cuts straight to her core. The camera cuts across the cities to a smoke-filled room. An unseen adversary slowly loads a weapon, fully aware of the prize Roman just claimed. You see, Serafina is no random victim. She is the buried secret in a bitter blood feud between true monsters. Roman believes he merely rescued a desperate girl. He has no idea he just lit the match that will burn his empire down. We rarely see the avalanche coming when we pick up a single, ordinary stone. The massive iron gates part slowly in the dark, opening like the jaws of a starving beast. Serafina sits entirely frozen. She is the hidden trigger destined to draw psychopaths out of the shadows. Roman, focused on his own dominance, remains blind to the violent storm he just invited inside. As the tires crunch over gravel, Serafina's mind races through fatal scenarios. She knows from bitter experience that wealth only makes human cruelty more creative. Men like Roman do not yell. They destroy you with a polite smile. Seeing his armed guards bow in perfect synchronization sends a spike of ice through her veins. She is stepping straight into a gilded cage. The most beautiful prisons in this world are always the ones that break your mind, long before they ever touch your body. Watch Serafina clutch her worn bag against her chest, her eyes darting across the shadows. Every nerve in her fragile body, Sathi, screams that she has merely traded a filthy cage for a perfect trap. Roman steps out onto the pavement. He does not reach for her. He simply states that she is safe here. But to a heartbroken by trauma, a promise of safety sounds exactly like a lie. The mansion rises before them, completely devoid of cheap flash. It is cold stone and heavy glass, the architectural mirror of a man who controls absolutely everything. He walks across the marble floors with the silent grace of a wolf returning to its den. It is a bitter lesson of survival. True danger never announces itself with a sudden roar. It always arrives with a perfectly calm, quiet invitation. The camera captures a tragic contrast. Serafina stands in her ruined dress against a hall of pristine marble. The staff moves around Roman like silent ghosts. A housekeeper spots the bruised girl. Hiding her shock a second too late, Roman catches it instantly, commanding her to the top-floor guest suite. It is a calculated isolation tactic. Serafina's exhausted mind jumps to the only logic she knows. She laughs, the sound thick with despair, accusing him of paying for her body. A dangerous shadow passes over Roman's cold eyes. He does not see himself as a common buyer of flesh. He sees himself as a dark savior, the architect of her new reality. It is a strange paradox of survival. The people who pull us from the absolute dark often become the exact ones we fear losing the most. The lighting turns stark as Roman steps closer. He claims he paid to get her out, spinning a hostile abduction into a heroic rescue. Serafina steps back, her breathing shallow, whispering that he is worse than the others. Roman does not deny it. True monsters never hide their shadows. They wear them like iron armor. He replies quietly that if he wanted to harm her, he would not be explaining himself. It is a masterful trap, tricking her into viewing his basic restraint as genuine mercy. Celeste, the housekeeper, steps forward with a warm robe, offering a gentle touch meant to crack her shell. Serafina's panic flares high, choking out that she will not sleep in his bed. The guards tense up. Let us remember this quiet warning. Mercy from a practiced predator is never truly free. Roman states she is not sleeping in his room, his voice a dead calm. When she demands to know why she is here, he drops his heaviest weapon. He already knows everything. He explains that Victor, the man hunting her, will undoubtedly tear her apartment apart tonight. Men like Roman do not react to chaos. They map the entire chessboard before the game begins. Serafina's fragile reality shatters. The terrifying thought of her vulnerable mother hits her like a physical blow. But Roman casually cuts the last string tying her to the outside world, revealing he already sent armed men to the clinic. By securing the only person she loves, he achieves absolute control over her soul. We often surrender our freedom willingly when the heavy iron cage is presented to us as an impenetrable shield. Serafina stares at him, her defensive walls reduced to dust. She whispers that he does not even know her. Roman's dark eyes lock onto hers, stating simply that he knows enough. For a girl who has lived her entire life invisible, being deeply seen by a dangerous man is an intoxicating drug that bypasses logic. Celeste guides her up the curving staircase. Serafina's legs feel like lead. She is drained, yet her heart hammers wildly. Let us pause here together, you and I. This is the tragic beat where the captive begins to romanticize the monster. She steps into the guest suite, the heavy door closing firmly behind her. It is a gilded cage, designed to make her old life feel utterly meaningless. True captivity always begins the exact moment we finally stop looking for an exit. The grand suite is engineered to overwhelm her senses with flawless stone and a level of luxury she could never afford. Celeste sets down fresh clothes and hot food. Serafina's tired mind cannot process a gift without searching for a hidden price. She asks why they are being nice, her voice cracking. The housekeeper delivers a soft dose of validation, murmuring that Roman never brings women here. The staff always plays their part, spinning the grand illusion that the captive is a rare prize. Celeste steps out and the heavy door clicks shut. The silence that follows is total and suffocating. Stripped of the violent noise from the club, Serafina is left alone with the terrifying echo of her own heartbeat. The loudest battles we face always happen in the quietest rooms. Left alone, Serafina falls back on her oldest habit. She counts her crumpled money, $1,140. In the underworld, it is merely dust. It cannot save her mother. The truth hits her like an ice pick. Her nervous system finally breaks. Her hands shake violently, dropping the bills across the cold marble. She collapses, a terrible sob ripping from her throat. This is the sound of a soul shattering under the weight of terror. Crying in a monster's fortress feels exactly like bleeding in front of a shark. A sharp knock echoes against the wood. She scrambles up, desperately scrubbing the tears from her face, burying the pain before pulling the door open. A broken spirit always learns to hide its fragile pieces quickly just to survive. The cart holds only warm soup, fresh bread, and tea. No extravagant gifts. It is just profound, calculated comfort. Kindness from a predator is far more dangerous than his cruelty. Cruelty is a raised fist you can easily brace against. Kindness slips quietly under your skin and permanently rewrites your loyalties. Beside the bowl sits a note in sharp ink, ordering her to eat and sleep. Serafina's mind screams to resist, but her starving body betrays her. The warm taste of the broth almost makes her weep, planting a toxic seed of gratitude for her captor. Downstairs in the shadowed study, the master of the house goes back to work. Roman stands by the heavy glass window, coldly flipping through a stack of files. The psychological trap is perfectly set. Dominic steps into the dark study. He reports that Serafina's mother is guarded, but outside, Victor's syndicate is tearing the city apart to find the girl. Roman's eyes narrow in the shadows. He murmurs that they are not looking for money. He knows the grim mechanics of the underworld. A minor debt is merely a fake leash. Victor did not want cash. He wanted her terrified and compliant, because Serafina is tied to something infinitely more valuable. Roman is not keeping her upstairs out of kindness. He is securing a powerful asset. Stick with me here, because this changes everything. We are watching two ruthless sociopaths play a game of chess. In any war the most profound casualties are always the innocent pieces caught in the middle. The camera lingers on Dominic, a man who has spent years memorizing the cold rhythm of Roman's pulse. He has watched Roman carve up territories without a single blink. But Serafina is a disruption in this dark frame. "Are you planning to keep her here?" Dominic asks. Roman freezes, trying to brush her off as mere collateral, but Dominic knows better. "She is not a tool," Roman snaps, the words tearing out of him far too quickly. His armor is cracking. He is falling for a wild variable. We learn a vital lesson here. Human attachment is the one chaotic force that pure logic can never truly control. Sensing the dangerous shift, Dominic pivots. "I pulled what I could on Victor," he says smoothly, exposing the predator's sprawling web of phantom fronts. Victor specifically targeted isolated women. As Dominic speaks, Roman's face turns to absolute stone. "And nobody told me," he demands. "You and I have to look closely at this moment." His rage is not for the victims, but the wound of a king realizing another predator is hunting in his woods. His illusion of control is shattering. Dominic hesitates, handing over a folder of crumbling ledgers from Roman's father. Roman scans the yellowed pages, his chest tight, as he confronts an unchangeable past. It teaches us a harsh reality. No man can ever truly outrun the ghosts of his own family bloodline. Suddenly, his dark eyes lock onto a single name, Mero, Serafina's father. Beside an emergency cash advance sits a heavy, familiar crest. It was the private mark of his father. Dominic watches a dangerous twitch in Roman's jaw. "It means her father borrowed from my father," Roman states, voice flat to choke back the rage. "Or someone engineered it to look that way," Dominic counters. For a boss demanding total authority, this invisible attack is unbearable. Upstairs, Serafina stands under scalding water, desperate to scrub the club's filthy residue from her skin. But hot water never washes away deep trauma. Staring into the mirror, her theatrical armor is gone. It reminds us of a quiet truth. Exhaustion always strips away our masks, leaving only our most fragile selves. She is just a terrified daughter gripping the cold sink to anchor her mind. Then, a sharp knock rattles the heavy door. Her body flinches, panic flooding her veins. "Who is it?" she calls out. "Roman," comes the heavy reply. She opens the door just an inch, using the wood as a flimsy shield. He stands there with sleeves rolled up, his predatory edge sharp in the dim light. "Your mother is safe for now," he says. Serafina lets out a broken breath. "For now?" she whispers, fear rushing back. He warns her that Victor will try again. Her mind snaps to its dark baseline. "Then I have to go back to the club," she says. This highlights a tragic reality of human nature. We often run back into our familiar cages to avoid the terror of the unknown. Roman stares at her, completely thrown. "You think I brought you here to send you back?" "You cannot protect me forever," she replies weakly. "I do not need forever, I need tonight. Watch this moment with me." Notice the arrogance radiating from his posture. He believes his shadow alone can hold back the dark. "You do not understand," she begs. "If I do not pay, they do not stop." Roman steps closer, suffocating the space. Then maybe it is time he met a man who does more than scare him. Serafina freezes, caught between running and trusting this dangerous savior. His eyes drift to the crumpled bills on the bed. "You were counting again," he says softly. Her face flushes with shame. "It is none of your business." "It became my business when they threatened your mother." He fires back. "Why?" she snaps. This teaches us that anger is often a fragile shield we raise when we are simply too exhausted to feel fear anymore. The room's tension is suffocating. "Why do you care?" she demands. "Because you wanted to feel like a hero." Roman remains still, a cold tactician. Do not mistake restraint for vanity. His voice drops to a whisper. "I care because I know what happens to women Victor targets, and because he is using a debt tied to my family." Her body shrinks back as if struck. "Your family?" This is a cruel reminder of a profound life truth. Our hidden past always finds a way to bleed into the present. "Your father's debt may have started with mine," Roman confesses. "My father never said that," she cries, voice breaking. "Would he have?" Roman asks softly. The question is a dagger, finally slicing through the fragile illusions she held about her father's manic, delusional final years. Gabriel spent his final years hiding bills and making whispered phone calls. He left Serafina to face monsters alone. For years, her resentment toward him was her only fuel. Now, Roman shifts the narrative. "Why would your father lend money to mine?" she asks. "That is what I am trying to find out," he says smoothly. "And if you do find out?" she whispers. Roman's eyes darken with lethal certainty. "Then I decide who pays for what happened to you." Logic dictates she should run from the man tied to her ruin, yet she steps aside. We learn an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes a wounded soul will willingly step into a dangerous fire to avoid dying in the freezing cold. She lets him in. As Roman crosses her threshold, his heavy presence irreversibly alters the room's fragile atmosphere. Notice his dark eyes sweeping the bedroom. You and I can clearly see what he is cataloging. The flimsy robe, the desperate stacks of cash, the way her body leans toward the door. "Sit," he commands softly. Her instinct is to fight, but her exhausted body obeys. She perches on the edge of the chair. Here is the tragic beauty of his control. Rather than towering over her, Roman crouches down, lowering his profile. "Start from the beginning," he murmurs. "No protecting your father. Tell me exactly how this started." Beneath his focused stillness, her walls finally shatter. We see that true healing often begins the moment we stop pretending we are unbreakable. Defying logic, she speaks, using the cold math of medical debts as a safe doorway into the overwhelming darkness of her trauma. Her nightmare began where so many tragedies do. With the sickness of a loved one, the medical bills drained everything, leaving her exposed to the wolves. The enforcers smiled at first, claiming her father owed a simple family debt. But when she missed their impossible deadlines, the masks vanished. They invaded her home, proving they watched her mother's clinic. It was an absolute siege of her mind. This reveals a brutal truth. The highest price we ever pay is often the cost of our own survival. Roman listens to her confession in dead silence. His features freeze into pure ice as she whispers the lies Vincent used to lure her in. Just dancing, quick money, private clients if you choose. It is the exact, sickening poetry monsters used to buy and sell human souls. In the heavy light, a subtle twitch in Roman's jaw is the only crack in his marble facade. He begins to speak, but the words die in his throat, sparing her the brutal weight of the question. She lifts her chin in fragile defiance. "No," she whispers. "Vincent said you were available." Roman murmurs. She looks away. "Vincent says whatever makes men open their wallets." "You actually believed him?" Roman nods. "At first." A flush of shame rises in her cheeks. "Of course you did." Roman's voice drops softly. "But I stopped believing him before you stepped off that stage." She stares, breathless. "Why?" He delivers the devastating truth. "Because you look like someone trying desperately not to break apart. You and I learn a beautiful truth here. Real empathy sees right through our thickest armor." That is the exact moment her world shatters. Watch her carefully now. What flashes across her eyes is not trust, but something far more dangerous. Relief. Her walls crack. Roman steps back, unable to bear the rawness of her grief. There is something else. She breathes. Trembling fingers pull a tarnished silver pendant from her collar. "My father gave me this when I was 16. A week before he vanished." Roman's gaze sharpens, the protector morphing back into a predator. "What is it?" "I do not know," she whispers. "He begged me never to lose it. Said if anyone asked about his debts, I must never mention this." Roman recognizes the signature of hidden sins. It teaches us that the secrets our parents bury often become the heavy chains we must wear. "Did they come asking?" He presses softly. Serafina lowers her head, hiding tears. "A man came. Right after he disappeared." She speaks of a stranger at their door, claiming to be a lawyer. When his eyes landed on her necklace, the color drained from his face. Her lie bought her life. Roman steps forward, hesitating inches away. "May I?" he asks softly. She nods, passing the metal into his scarred hands. He traces the worn edges. "This opens," he murmurs. She shakes her head. "No, it never has." But his fingers find the invisible seam. "This is not jewelry." "Serafina," he says, a tragic weight pulling his words down. "It is a vessel." Her breath catches. "For what?" Roman's eyes meet hers. "Maybe for the reason Victor is willing to bleed a girl dry over an endless debt." We learn a haunting lesson here. Sometimes what we cling to for comfort is what destroys us. The silence is suffocating. She faces the agonizing truth that she wears a death warrant around her neck. The image she held of her father instantly turns to ash. She whispers into the heavy air, asking if he truly hid something inside the artifact. Roman looks at her with the tragic logic of a man raised entirely in the shadows. He states plainly that ruthless men do not threaten a sick woman over $25,000 unless she holds a hidden fortune. Suddenly, his phone buzzes. Dominic reports an attempted grab at the clinic by 2 false medics. One escaped, but her mother is safe. Serafina stifles a terrified sob. Roman narrows his dark eyes, knowing the sheer cruelty of his world, and asks if they left a message. It teaches us a very simple lesson. Sudden chaos always strips away our comforting illusions, proving that the truth we try to ignore will eventually find us. Dominic hesitates before answering. He reveals the bleeding man claimed the debt was never about money, but rather about what her father stole. You and I know what it looks like when reality completely collapses, and this is exactly what happens to Serafina. Panic rises like a tidal wave as she denies it, whispering that her father was not that kind of man. Roman corrects her with a mournful gaze, pointing out that whatever was taken, the hunters still have not found it. He sighs, reminding her that she never truly knew what kind of man her father became. It is a heartbreaking reality we all face. We build perfect versions of the people we love, but true maturity requires us to accept them for the deeply flawed humans they actually were. His devastating truth slices right through her armor. She glares at him with absolute hatred, her hands trembling as she commands him to leave. Roman blinks, genuinely thrown off balance by the rare rejection. Her voice cracks under the immense weight of betrayal, accusing him of tying her father's sins to his violent bloodline. Bitter tears spill down her cheeks. Roman stands still. For a fleeting second, the ruthless boss vanishes, leaving a man filled with aching regret. He sets the pendant gently on the table, asking her to lock the door. She sinks to the cold floor in the quiet dark, sobbing into her hands. Sometimes, being unmade by pain is the only way forward. We must completely break down before we can find the quiet strength to rebuild our shattered lives. The debt and Roman's shadow form a suffocating web. Serafina sees the tragic truth. She is drowning in a relentless cycle of violence, passed down from father to child. The irony is staggering. The only man capable of protecting her is tied to the monsters who ruined her family. Down in the dim study, Roman paces like a caged beast, radiating suppressed fury before slamming the ledger onto his desk. He stands with Julian, a clinical profiler operating without a moral compass. This is no longer just business. Julian dissects the life of Gabriel Marrow, a simple courier holding the bloody keys to a 15-year-old nightmare. It serves as a stark reminder. The ghosts of our past are never truly buried, and eventually, every single hidden secret will demand a final reckoning. In the cold glow of the study lamps, Julian lays out the harsh facts about Serafina's father. The file reveals a flood of dirty money, followed by a frantic attempt to erase his own existence. These are the desperate actions of a man cornered by crushing medical bills. Roman freezes in absolute stillness when Julian explains Gabriel ran packages for Roman's own father. Julian slides a grainy photograph across the desk, capturing both their fathers together, while a third figure lurks in the shadows. The sheer malice of the third man bleeds right through the paper. It is a snapshot of tragedy, the moment poison entered their lives. The lesson here is ancient. The unhealed wounds and reckless choices of one generation always become the heavy burdens of the next. Roman stares at the image, demanding they clear the blur. As the face sharpens, reality twists into something worse. It is Victor Cade. Victor is not just a parasite feeding on this tragedy, he is the architect. Julian murmurs that a desperate Gabriel must have stolen something valuable from him. Roman turns his head, looking toward the ceiling, thinking of the locked room where Serafina weeps. A guard suggests they force the artifact from her immediately. Roman snaps a sharp refusal. He insists she must be walked to the truth, not dragged. His men assume it is merely a tactical play, but we see the truth beneath his cold armor. This ruthless kingpin is falling in love. It reminds us that real strength is never about forcing compliance, but having the patience to let someone offer their trust freely. Upstairs, the heavy silence is broken only by Serafina's ragged breathing. She sits on the bed, the pendant resting like a stone in her palm. She agonizes over whether her father was a victim or the villain all along. We must remember a simple truth. The torture of not knowing will rot a soul faster than a painful reality ever could. She whispers a prayer for her mother. The door creaks open, but Roman does not enter with the stride of a mob boss. He steps softly into the dim light, holding a steaming cup of chamomile tea. It is a stunning, deeply human gesture. He is dismantling her terror, offering quiet warmth to a woman who has known nothing but bitter cold. It proves that even in the darkest of spaces, a single act of genuine care can rewrite the rules of survival. Her tear-stained eyes dart toward him, suspicious of the offering. She demands to know why a man of violence is acting with care. Roman looks at his scarred hands, admitting he does not understand it himself. We watch two broken souls attempt to bind their wounds. His raw honesty slips past her defenses faster than any lie could. He hands her the file, not as a master giving orders, but as an equal sharing the burden of truth. He tells her not to trust the folder blindly, becoming the only anchor in her shattering world. She opens it to find the tragic map of a man losing his mind, crumbled receipts, and one haunting photograph of a rusted storage door. It serves as a profound reminder. In a world full of deception, shared vulnerability is the only foundation for lasting trust. The camera pushes in on Serafina as her traumatic fog parts, revealing a single, glaring image. She envisions a broken vending machine, buzzing under the sickly yellow lights of a desolate storage yard. In her mind's eye, she sees her father. Sweat beads on his forehead, his hands shaking as he grips her shoulders, begging for absolute secrecy. It is a quiet tragedy. When we force a child to carry the dark secrets of adults, we permanently fracture their innocent soul. Her lips part as the memory solidifies, and she whispers an old code aloud, a B and a 17. In the adjacent room, bathed in the harsh glow of monitors, Roman and his associate freeze. The audio feed crackles loudly. What was just a tragic echo of a lost childhood has suddenly become the exact tactical key they need to survive the coming war. The tension sharpens to a razor edge as Roman calculates their shrinking window of time. If their rival knows about the artifact, he is already hunting for that storage unit. Shivering in a damp robe, Serafina waits. The harsh light catches her bare shoulders, yet Roman's gaze remains clinical. He tosses her dark clothes meant for a midnight escape, muttering a dry remark about his partner, always predicting disaster. Then, the unexpected happens. Serafina laughs. It is a small, fractured sound, echoing against the concrete walls, but it marks a monumental shift. She is no longer just a frightened captive waiting for the end. It teaches us a vital lesson. Finding a spark of humor in our darkest moments is often the very first step toward reclaiming our power and surviving the chaos. You and I know how a single quiet moment can rewrite the rules of a room. When that genuine laugh escapes her lips, the heavy air completely shifts. Roman has built his life on emotional ice, viewing attachment as a fatal flaw. He knows he should have smashed the pendant to take the data inside. Instead, he waits, silently needing her to hand it over willingly. It is a tragic truth of the human heart. The second we choose another person's emotional survival over our own strict rules, we expose our throats to the blade. When Serafina steps out of the shadows, stripped of her protective walls, she is breathtakingly real. For one terrifying beat, the killer simply stares, forgetting the bloody game he is supposed to be playing. It is a reminder that love has the power to disarm even the most dangerous among us. Serafina stands under the dim hallway bulb, her vulnerability laid bare. Catching his lingering gaze, she instinctively crosses her arms in a subtle flinch of survival. Roman clears his throat, fighting to hide the hammering in his chest, and offers a clumsy remark. The lines between captor and savior are hopelessly blurring. As they step toward the stairs, the illusion shatters. The floor below is a war zone, his men quietly loading weapons. Out in the city, a rival plans their slaughter, while a silent traitor within Roman's house waits to strike. Neither knows the place they are rushing toward will break their reality forever. It leaves us with a haunting lesson. No matter how much we wish to retreat into the safety of a quiet moment, the brutal battles of the real world always come crashing through our door. Her father witnessed a truth that demanded his last breath. As Roman and Serafina move through this deadly game, The boundary between a guardian's duty and a tyrant's obsession dissolves. It brings us to a devastating realization. Genuine affection cannot survive when choked by the weeds of absolute control. Soon she will witness the brutality he unleashes when his possessions are threatened. Yet, captivated by the tragic gravity of each other, they fail to notice the creeping doom. In the shadows, a desperate traitor watches. A glowing screen illuminates a sweat-slicked face, sending a silent beacon to summon an army to the rusted gates. The message finds a phantom rival whose very name would have driven Roman to murder without a single moment of hesitation. Miles away, a solitary figure waits in the pitch black. A chilling smile creeps across his face, while his fingers slide ammunition into a heavy rifle. We cut back to Roman and Serafina stepping into a desolate storage yard. The biting wind transforms a simple search into a nightmare. You and I have probably felt this specific kind of silence before. It is that suffocating stillness that arrives right before a tragedy. Rusted doors line the path like forgotten tombs of generational trauma. Roman scatters enforcers to hunt the perimeter, his dark eyes piercing the gloom. Beside him, Serafina trembles, her knuckles bleach bone white around her father's pendant, her breathing completely frantic. It leaves us with a painful truth. We can never outpace the demons we refuse to confront. The sharp stench of decaying rust overwhelms Serafina. In a flash, she is dragged back to her childhood, feeling the phantom weight of her father pressing her into the dark, pleading with her to hide. That innocent confusion morphs into an agonizing panic. Roman stands still, observing the microscopic quiver of her jaw. He moves just close enough to anchor her spiraling thoughts, his presence acting as a dark gravity. "Do you recognize anything?" he asks. Fighting through the fog, she faintly recalls a broken vending machine and a burnt-out bulb. Roman signals his crew to tap the cameras. He pins her with a relentless stare. "Think," he commands softly. It is a vital warning for us all. The most soothing words are very often the invisible chains of absolute dominance. Roman pushes her deeper into the memory. Serafina shuts her eyes, regressing to a terrified little girl. The ghostly echo of her father's forced laughter fills her ears, a sound designed to mask his paralyzing fear. She visualizes his shaking fingers, tracing a cryptic code onto her palm. B-71, she declares with sudden clarity. That was her ultimate lifeline. Roman instantly orders his enforcers to sweep the maze for that unit. They vanish into the suffocating gloom. Serafina is unraveling, her heartbeat violently pulsing against her pale skin. Still, Roman remains beside her, an imposing fortress of dark calm. It is a tragic display of a trauma bond forming. In our most vulnerable moments of panic, we willingly chain our survival to the very monsters who could easily drown us. You and I should look closely at this exact moment. As Roman guides her, Serafina's terror rots into a desperate trust in this violent man. They arrive at Unit B-71. A corroded padlock secures the door like a sealed crypt of grief. Roman lifts heavy cutters, but Serafina halts him. Her hands shake as she unclasps her pendant, recalling how her father would obsessively tap it when his world fell apart. Roman accepts the necklace, analyzing it with the focus of an assassin. He turns it over, revealing a microscopic carving of the storage number. Serafina drops to the concrete, crushed by the revelation. "It is a key," Roman murmurs into the dark. It captures a brutal human reality. Our most agonizing burdens are almost always camouflaged as precious gifts of love. Roman shatters the ancient lock. The snap violently pierces the silence. He forces the rusted door upward, exhaling a wave of damp decay and buried sins. A dying bulb flickers to expose the pathetic truth of her father's existence. There is no hidden wealth, just a dented cabinet, a decaying fireproof box, and rotting cardboard. Serafina steps across the threshold, walking into the deception that poisoned her childhood. Roman glides right behind her, a dark shadow. Dominic barks a warning from the doorway, but she hears nothing. Her eyes are glued to that metal box. She stands frozen, fighting a losing war to merge the father she worshipped with the stranger he actually was. We all must swallow this jagged pill. The true heartbreak of growing up is discovering our towering childhood idols were always just terrified, broken people. Julian steps out of the gloom, his flashlight slicing through the thick dust. Roman remains still in the shadows, commanding them to open the safe first. Watch how violently Serafina's hands shake as she hesitates, her pale fingers strangling the pendant. It highlights a tragic human reflex. We instinctively cling to the familiar pain we know, terrified of the unknown truth. Julian locates a concealed ridge. A sharp snap echoes off the concrete. Lying inside on rotted velvet is a tiny brass key. For her entire life, she carried the architect of her trauma against her own beating heart. It proves a profound lesson. The emotional weights we refuse to put down are frequently the exact instruments required for our freedom. Roman's stoic face breaks with a brief, melancholy smile. Julian twists the brass, and the steel surrenders with a heavy clack. Under the dim light sit two artifacts of ruin, a silver flash drive, and yellowing papers bound by a decaying ribbon. Julian reaches for the documents. The color drains from his face, turning him into a ghost. Roman drags the ledger across the desk, his eyes scanning the ink. Gabriel Marrow's signature rests right next to Roman's own file, but the third name makes Roman's jaw bulge. Luca Santoro, the brother he trusted more than God himself. Dominic exhales a devastated curse. Serafina's voice fractures as she begs to know who Luca is. Roman refuses to sugarcoat the horror. You and I know exactly how this story goes, do we not? The most fatal wounds are never inflicted by nameless enemies. The monsters that tear your life apart are always the friends you welcome to eat at your own table. Julian grabs the next page, his hands trembling in the absolute silence. Julian's voice barely breaks the silence. This book is not merely an accounting of stolen cash. It is a fully loaded weapon. Gabriel was coerced into burying their venomous sins. A sharp gasp rips from Serafina's throat. She stares at Roman, whose knuckles have gone white gripping the desk. He is paralyzed by a handwritten memo from his own father. The ink coldly dictates that Gabriel was terrified, and his silence needed to be permanently secured. Roman reads the betrayal 3 times. Serafina stares at the paper, watching her innocent universe vaporize into dust. Was he a thief? She asks. Julian shakes his head. Gabriel was not stealing. He was forging a shield to keep his daughter alive. It teaches us a haunting lesson. What the world comfortably labels as cowardice is often just a terrified parent, crossing every moral line to ensure their child sees tomorrow. Roman remains mute, rolling the cold metal drive in his scarred palm. The devastating reality clicks into place. Gabriel signed his own execution warrant the second he hoarded these documents. A tear escapes Serafina's eye. Her father was never a coward. He was a fortress absorbing the danger to protect his little girl. She reaches to claim the drive, but Julian snaps that they are exposed. Roman slides the metal slip into his coat. And then, the quiet violently shatters. A deafening rifle round tears through the night, punching a jagged hole through the steel door an inch from Serafina's face. She drops to the concrete. Roman moves with the terrifying fluidity of a shadow. His arm hooks her waist, dragging her behind the rusted cabinet while Dominic fires blindly into the dark. The yard detonates into a hellscape of exploding glass and shrieking metal. It forces us to accept a cruel reality. The serene peace we desperately cling to is often nothing more than an illusion. It is just a held breath before the true nightmare begins. The roar of heavy engines violently erupts outside. Dominic screams over the deafening gunfire. They walked blindly into an orchestrated slaughter. Roman's dark eyes narrow, processing the brutal betrayal. Someone inside his own circle sold him to the highest bidder. Serafina presses her spine against the freezing concrete, convulsing with absolute terror. Roman hovers over her, using his broad back to block the jagged shrapnel slicing through the air. Her fingers bury themselves in her necklace as her childhood illusions burn to ash. Strip away the expensive tailored suits, and this is all that remains. Just primal, unvarnished violence. The harshest reality of human nature is undeniable. The elegant masks we wear always melt away. The second our survival is challenged. While mercenaries flood the perimeter, Roman operates with a disturbing calm. He flashes a hand signal through the smoke. Without hesitation, Dominic drops an advancing assassin with one thunderous shot. Another body slams into the dirt. Julian rolls behind a van, clutching the ledger. Roman pivots to Serafina, ordering her to sprint toward Dominic. Instead, her fingers dig into his sleeve, refusing to leave his side. Roman snarls that this is no negotiation. But Serafina pushes back, wielding her panic like a blade. She screams over the gunfire, demanding he stop treating her like luggage. Stick with me, because you and I are watching a profound shift here. A spark of dark pride ignites inside Roman's cold eyes. He states she should be afraid. She whispers that she is terrified. Then use it, he growls. It is a powerful revelation about the human spirit. We frequently discover our most unbreakable strength buried right beneath our crippling fear. Moving with predatory grace, Roman rises from cover, dropping an advancing shadow with two flawless shots. "Run," he roars. Serafina scrambles through the dark, boots slipping on the blood-soaked gravel. Dominic intercepts her trembling frame behind a rusted truck, forcing the heavy steel of a pistol into her numb fingers, right there. Kneeling in the damp mud, the fragile girl she used to be shatters completely. We all eventually face this brutal truth in life. No one is coming to save you until you decide to fight for your own breath. Pressing her back against the tire, she watches Roman. He does not surrender to blind rage. Instead, he moves like a dark conductor, directing a symphony of ruin, placing every bullet with surgical precision to build a wall around her. Witnessing such calculated bloodshed should have repulsed her, but it pulls her closer, a moth mesmerized by a fatal fire. It is the violent genesis of a twisted devotion, blooming in the unforgiving soil of a war zone. Let us look at this piece by piece, you and I. The deafening roar of gunfire finally bleeds into a haunting echo. A single attacker breaks rank to run, but Julian stops Roman cold, screaming his name while holding out a phone. Roman snatches the device, and the smooth, arrogant voice of Luca Santoro slithers through the speaker. He sounds utterly detached from the carnage. Luca casually mocks Roman for his bleeding heart, exposing a grim reality. In a world populated by monsters, clinging to your empathy merely paints a target on your back. Roman grips the phone so tightly, his knuckles crack, rage flooding his veins. Luca simply laughs, treating the total destruction of a family like collecting a dusty, forgotten debt from Gabriel. Luca reveals the sinister architecture of his empire. Debts are never meant to be settled, only kept open to force families to their knees. Serafina sags against the truck, her gaze hollow. Roman buries his fury beneath a mask of stone, demanding to know where Luciana is. Luca takes a theatrical breath, savoring the poison he is about to deliver. He preys upon a universal truth. We are too eager to place blind faith in anyone holding official papers. A devastating scream tears from Serafina. The ambush in the yard was just a distraction. While Roman battled phantoms outside, Luca's men simply waltzed right through the hospital doors. It stands as a terrifying reminder that our own misplaced trust is often the deadliest weapon forged against us. The reality of Luciana vanishing drains the oxygen from the yard. Serafina chokes on the heavy air as panic takes hold. Roman ends the call, his expression shifting into a chilling canvas. "You told me she was safe," she whispers. Roman closes the distance, vowing to bring her back. "You cannot promise that," she screams, her buried grief erupting into wildfire. He stands perfectly still, letting her rage wash over him. True strength means being willing to absorb the jagged pain of those you protect. "Listen to me," he commands, his tone dropping into a dangerous rumble. Luca made a mistake. She looks up, trembling uncontrollably. What mistake? Roman steps in so close his broad shadow swallows her whole. We are always the most vulnerable in the exact moment we believe the victory is ours. Stick with me here, because we are about to uncover what really happened. He made this personal, Roman says, slicing through her terror. What does that mean? She asks. He stares down at her, unblinking. It means I am done talking. He never raises his voice. It is the terrifying, quiet promise of a man preparing to burn the city to ash. Always beware of quiet anger, for it is the most destructive force on earth. Dominic shouts out a target by the river. We strike first, Roman declares. Julian holds up the flash drive, and Roman orders everyone to his estate, the only fortress sturdy enough to survive this storm. An hour later, bathed in the cold glow of his study monitors, they uncover a systemic rot far darker than they ever imagined. The pale monitor light washes over their faces, illuminating a digital web of pure evil. Folders expose years of institutional rot. At the center sits Luca Santoro, flashing the untouchable arrogance of a king. Footage catches Victor Cade trading human lives like cheap cargo. Roman braces against the desk, visibly nauseated. The man who broke bread at his table had been poisoning the well for years. Life teaches us a bitter lesson. Those standing closest to you are in the best position to slide the knife in. Serafina watches, her tears freezing into cold horror. My father saw this, she whispers. Julian nods. Dominic clicks a grainy file. Gabriel's exhausted face fills the screen, his paranoid eyes darting as he searches for the ghosts already coming to end his life. Let us open the case file on Gabriel Marrow, you and I. Seeing her father's face, Serafina gasps, the shock striking like a physical blow. This video is a transmission from the grave. Staring into the lens, Gabriel confesses. He found the syndicate's secrets and tried to use them to purchase his family's safety. He underestimated the monsters. It is a tragic lesson in bargaining with the devil. You never get to dictate the price. Serafina breaks down, the lifelong lie of her father's abandonment finally washing away. Roman stands beside her, a statue carved from ice. Gabriel's final breath is a dire warning. He labels Luca a man devoid of a soul, pointing to Roman as the lone blade left to cut away the rot before a rabid victor destroys everything. The screen dies into hissing static, throwing a cold strobe across their faces. There are no neat resolutions here, only the bleeding edge of truth. Serafina collapses into a chair as decades of repressed agony shatter her defenses. Let the camera linger on Roman. His eyes reflect the dancing static. He did not pull the trigger, but the crushing weight of his family legacy buries him alive. He sees the total rot Luca pumped through his bloodline. He knew my name, Roman whispers, his voice stripped of its iron armor. Dominic watches quietly, realizing Gabriel saw Roman as the only cure to this sickness. We can never truly outrun the sins of our fathers, but we can choose to face them. Roman pivots slowly, anchoring his absolute focus on the broken woman before him. Watch this fragile moment unfold. Roman closes the distance, wading through air thick with grief. He presses his hands over her trembling shoulders, forcing her to look up. The harsh lighting softens as he dismantles her despair with surgical precision. He delivers the brutal truth. Her father lied solely to build a fortress around her. It is a tragic irony in life that our deepest wounds often come from the hands trying to keep us safe. When she asks why the betrayal still hurts, Roman offers a devastating reality. Love and absolute ruin are frequently born from the exact same seed. Her final walls crumble into dust. She collapses against his chest, and he cages her in a fierce embrace. In this single heartbeat, the looming violence fades entirely, leaving only their shared tragedy sharply in focus. The ambient noise drops, leaving only the raw sound of her sobbing against his chest. Study the rigid line of Roman's jaw. Here is a killer raised in a frozen wasteland, suddenly burning alive with the warmth of empathy. The others melt into the shadows to respect this sacred grief. When she pulls away, her breathing ragged, Roman's hand rests firmly at the nape of her neck, anchoring her to the present. She looks up, searching the eyes of a supposed monster, but finds only her refuge. She asks what becomes of her once this nightmare concludes. Roman does not hesitate. "You stay with me," he vows, his words a gravelly promise. It reminds us that true sanctuary is never just coordinates on a map, but a person willing to stand beside you in the absolute dark. The cinematic frame tightens, shutting out the ruined world. Roman's gaze is a dark, heavy ocean. He warns her not to ask, that if she is not prepared to be bound to his life forever. Despite the death waiting outside, her heart hammers against her ribs. Panic vanishes, replaced by a magnetic pull. He brings his thumb to her jawline, his touch gentle enough to let her escape. She does not flinch. When their lips meet, it is an absolute, shattering surrender. In his arms, a woman who spent her existence as collateral damage finally recognizes her true worth. The lesson here is timeless. We only ever accept the love we truly believe we deserve. The quiet poetry of their breath is abruptly shattered by Dominic's harsh voice from the doorway, dragging the cruel reality back into the room. Notice the atmosphere turn to ice when Dominic names the riverfront facility. The light drains from Roman's face, replaced by the dead stare of an apex predator. He locks away his heart, retreating to the comfort of violence. "Then we end it," he commands. When Serafina demands to walk into the fire with him, his protective instinct flares into suffocating control. He wants to lock her away to keep her safe. But watch the defiant fire in her eyes as she refuses to yield. She maps out Luca's psychology, explaining her presence on the board will force his hand. She steps back into the nightmare to rewrite the ending. True strength never lies in hiding from monsters, but in stepping into their cages on our own terms. Dominic nods at her grim logic, earning a murderous glare from Roman. Julian stands by her side, a choice that seals her tragic fate. The lens captures the agony fracturing the cold marble of Roman's face. His mind knows she is right, yet his soul screams against the risk. Serafina is no longer frightened prey. She has transformed into the fierce architect of her own survival. The scene shifts to a damp warehouse beside the ink-black water. Victor paces the concrete like a rabid dog, his ego dripping with a desperate thirst for violence. But Luca sits in absolute stillness. He is the dark maestro of a tragedy he orchestrated himself, entirely devoid of guilt. In life, the most destructive forces are rarely the loud outbursts, but rather the quiet, calculating silences we fail to notice. As Roman soldiers encircle the rusted walls, the camera pushes in. Luca simply smiles. Let us look at this fatal miscalculation together. Through the flickering monitors, Victor and Luca watch the approach. They are convinced that love has made Roman soft, believing human connection ruins a predator's focus. But they are completely wrong. Roman has accepted the total destruction of his own past just to ensure she keeps breathing. Arrogance always blinds cruel men to the terrifying power of someone who has nothing left to lose. Outside, the infiltration plays out like a dark ballet. Streetlights die, cameras go blind, guards drop to the pavement without a single sound. Before stepping into the slaughter, Roman locks Serafina safely inside the armored car. He leans down, pressing his forehead firmly against hers in the shadows. It is not a terrified goodbye. It is a wordless transfer of his fierce strength. It shows us that true devotion means giving away our own armor to protect the ones we cherish most. The heavy iron doors kick open, and absolute chaos swallows the frame. In under 60 seconds, the warehouse detonates into a labyrinth of gunfire and screaming steel. Watch Victor's men scatter, their bloated egos entirely useless against a phantom who paints the walls with violence. But the camera refuses to linger on the bloodshed. Instead, it pulls back slowly, moving through the thick glass to find Serafina trapped in the armored darkness of the car. The muffled cracks of rifles echo like rolling thunder inside her skull, stretching every passing second into a lifetime of agony. She clutches a heavy handgun, her knuckles turning bone white, her breath shallow. We often forget a very simple truth. The most terrifying battles we face are usually fought entirely alone, trapped within the quiet confines of our own minds. Suddenly, a blood-soaked hand slaps violently against her window. A dying enemy crawls toward her locked door. Raw terror floods her veins, threatening to freeze her solid. Her muscles locked down tight, the heavy trauma of her past begs her to simply surrender. But a sudden memory cuts through the suffocating panic. She hears Roman's low, steady voice guiding her trembling hands. She absolutely refuses to be a helpless victim in her own story anymore. The gunshot shatters the window in a brilliant explosion of glass. The brutal kick of the weapon nearly snaps her wrist, but the dark shadow outside crumples to the cold pavement. In this violent instant, she destroys her own learned helplessness. We learn here that true courage is never the absence of fear, but the agonizing choice to fight back despite it. She wipes away a single hot tear, hardening her soul. Meanwhile, the camera cuts inside the facility to a tragic standoff. Victor cowers behind the frail, trembling body of her mother, shouting desperate threats into the cold air. Let us step into this suffocating room together where the air is heavy with the copper scent of impending death. The lens pans to find Luca stepping into the harsh, flickering light. He moves with the sick theatricality of a man who has fallen in love with his own chains. For decades he served an empire that ground his soul into dust. Yet he still worships the ghost of his captivity. It is a harsh lesson. When we hold on to our bitter resentments, we become the wardens of our own prisons. Luca spits pure poison about Roman's father, confessing his dark betrayals. Through it all, Roman remains a statue of cold marble, his eyes locked on the hostages. But then the heavy iron door groans open. Serafina steps into the center of the nightmare. Her arrival is a spark in a powder keg, shifting the entire weight of this tragedy in a breathless second. For the very first time, we witness a tiny crack in Roman's iron mask. A single muscle tenses in his jaw. The unbearable weight of truly loving someone has finally breached his fortified defenses. Luca eagerly seizes on this rare vulnerability, his voice dripping with venom as he cruelly mocks her tragic bloodline. Beside him, Victor tightens his brutal grip on the terrified hostage. The camera focuses deeply on Serafina. Her hands shake violently, trembling like pale leaves caught in a bitter storm. Yet her voice cuts through the darkness. It is steady and completely defiant. Love often demands we stand tall, even when our very bones are shaking with fear. The silence stretches out, pulled taut until it snaps. Driven by the primal, desperate love of a mother, Luciana throws her frail body against her captor. A kinetic burst of pure violence follows. Roman's weapon flashes in the dim room, a thunderous roar that drops Victor to the cold floor. The room plunges into a disorienting darkness, pierced only by the jagged strobe of heavy gunfire. Twisted shadows dance on the concrete walls like demons. Victor, bleeding out and consumed by the blind rage of a dying king, lunges toward Luciana for one final act of cruelty. Watch closely now. This is the exact moment the innocent girl dies and the fierce survivor is born. Serafina throws her body right between the monster and her fragile mother. The camera lingers on her tear-streaked face. The girl who once froze in terror raises a trembling barrel. She whispers that they severely underestimated her heart, her voice breaking. Before she pulls the trigger, the gunshot echoes loudly, like a slammed iron door, closing firmly on her tragic past. It proves that our deepest wounds can forge our strongest weapons. Hearing the groan of a falling man, Roman spins around, his dark eyes catching the wicked glint of Luca's blade in the shadows. You and I have seen this specific kind of blind hubris before. It is the fatal flaw etched into every great tragedy. The brutal physical exchange leaves Roman stumbling backward, a rare moment of weakness that Luca greets with a twisted, triumphant smile. The old man mocks the very concept of human love, utterly blind to his own approaching doom. But the truly devastating blow does not come from the Mafia king. It comes from the darkest corner of the room. The camera shifts slowly to Luciana, her frail hands wrapped tightly around the cold steel of a discarded pistol. Years of silent weeping, of bruised ribs and swallowed screams, suddenly forge into a piercing, deadly focus. She looks her lifelong abuser dead in the eye, claiming back her stolen life in one breathless whisper, and fires. The beautiful irony of it all is a lesson we cannot ignore. The women, these arrogant men treated like ordinary dirt, became the very earth that finally buried them. The choking dust finally begins to settle, painting the cold air in a hazy, cinematic glow. Victor, still drowning in his own pathetic delusions of grandeur, tries to prop his ruined body against the shattered mahogany desk. He is clinging to a temporary throne made of ashes. Roman steps forward, his face a blank canvas of absolute emptiness. He kicks the fallen weapon away before delivering the final, silent judgment. There is no glorious victory here today, only the heavy, hollow quiet of a graveyard. Roman ignores the dark crimson blood blooming across his own ribs. He drops heavily to his knees beside Serafina, the solitary light left burning in his brutally dark world. She is locked in the icy grip of pure shock, staring blankly at the blood painting his hands. In a heartbeat, her own trauma melts into a frantic fear for his fading life. True love, in its absolute purest form, always demands that we momentarily forget our own bleeding wounds to tend to another. Roman weakly waves away her frantic, trembling hands. His voice is a low, rough whisper, spoken only to tether her spirit back to the earth. He gently cups her tear-stained cheek, creating a staggering contrast between horrific violence and immense, quiet tenderness. Breathing heavily, Luciana watches them from the floor. Through the foggy haze of near death, she looks at the towering man with blood soaking his collar. She calls him a true savior, the exact protector her late husband always prayed would arrive. The camera catches the slight, profoundly painful tightening of Roman's dark eyes. A man who has spent his entire life believing he is a monster cannot fathom being viewed as a saint. It reminds us that our true worth is often visible to everyone but ourselves. Later, behind the high walls of his fortress, the night falls heavy and cold. The physical bleeding has finally stopped, but the coming war is still breathing down their necks. In this dark underworld, hesitation is a death sentence. Come with me now, far away from the blood-soaked floors, and directly into the cold, calculated mind of a king at war. We watch a brilliantly brutal montage of systemic erasure unfold. With the quiet, clinical detachment of a surgeon, Roman systematically severs the vital arteries of his rival's empire. Dirty money burns. Names are whispered in dark alleys, and the arrogant megalomaniacs who thought they were untouchable gods are erased from the earth. He is violently cutting away the rotting flesh of his own toxic legacy. It reminds us that sometimes you must burn down your own house to finally be free of the ghosts living inside it. But the true emotional masterpiece of this entire sequence is his quiet return to her. As he pushes open the heavy oak door, the sheer violence simply drains out of his rigid posture. Serafina stands silently by the towering window, bathed in the fragile, pale light of a new dawn. The world outside is burning, yet in her silhouette, Roman finally finds his peace. The very second the door clicks shut, her wide eyes dart immediately to his tightly bandaged ribs. The violent trauma of the night is still humming beneath her pale skin like a live wire. She turns to face him, her voice barely a ragged breath, carrying the heavy weight of a stolen life. She killed a man, and the guilt is crushing her. Roman steps into the soft morning light. His tone is steady, framing the terrible act not as cold murder, but as the ugly, necessary price of simply breathing in this dark world. The tragedy deepens as she looks up, fresh tears catching in her lashes. She knows his entire world is poison, yet she whispers that her violent shaking only stops when he is standing in the room. It is a profoundly beautiful, devastating surrender. Often, the greatest peace we find is hidden inside the very chaos we fear. The camera pushes in closely on Roman's stoic face. The untouchable predator, the feared man of iron and blood, is brought completely to his knees by the staggering weight of her brutal honesty. Roman's jaw visibly tightens, a hard line of guilt and fear. He tries to push Serafina away, hoping to spark some dormant survival instinct in her. In a voice grinding like crushed stone, he warns her to run far from the heavy shadow he drags behind him. But her fingers only curl tighter into the fabric of his shirt. He knows he cannot erase the bruises left by her past, just as he cannot offer her some delusion of a quiet, ordinary life. Instead, he offers a blood-sworn vow. He will stand as a wall of fire between her and the wolves. No one will ever threaten her bloodline again. Look at the agonizing contradiction in him. He whispers she is free to leave, yet his massive hands hold her desperately against his chest. It reminds us that love is often a terrifying gamble. Let us pause and look at this quiet revelation together, because this is precisely where our Greek tragedy pivots toward hope. Roman frames his deep devotion as a brutal contract, offering to be the monster who keeps all other monsters away. Serafina stares up into his eyes, her mind haunted by a past where men used promises solely as heavy chains. A fragile smile touches her trembling lips as she whispers that she really ought to hate him. The suffocating tension finally breaks when Roman lets out a dry, self-deprecating sigh, muttering about his awful luck with romance. That brief flash of humor changes everything. The terror visibly drains from her shoulders. Her touch is no longer a plea to survive, teaching us that true agency only begins when fear ends. His arms surround her with a fierce, possessive gravity. He holds her like a man guarding his only treasure, even as his mind plots the burial of his enemies. When Serafina playfully leans back, teasingly revoking her promise of forever, a rare and genuine warmth softens the cruel angles of Roman's face. For the very first time, the exhausted, hunted animal inside her finally rests. The camera lingers on the pure relief in her smile. Yet the irony remains hopelessly thick. This gentle peace inside the room is bought by the blood spilling in the streets outside. The corrupt Mafia empire crumbles under the crushing weight of Roman's fury. We learn here that safety often demands a steep price. The cowards who once hid behind Luca's throne are now fleeing into the dark. We have walked through the darkest corridors of this story together, arriving at a quiet truth. True healing is never about hiding from the dark, but learning how to see clearly within it. Roman spends every waking second trying to shield her, building an iron fortress to keep her pain from returning. But the fragile bird with broken wings is long gone. Over the changing seasons, Serafina refuses the suffocating safety of a glass cage. Instead of shrinking away, she stands tall in his gloomy study, organizing the exact files and photographs that once brought her sheer terror. She dismantles her own nightmare piece by piece. By stepping out of the shadow of victimhood, she teaches us that real strength is adapting your heart to thrive, even in a wonderfully dangerous world. For the first time in his life, Roman's absolute control is fracturing. Serafina is no longer terrified of him, making her the most dangerous variable in his world. He tries to draw rigid lines, but she steps effortlessly over them, wearing his oversized shirts just to feel close to him. She remains the only force on Earth capable of overriding his cold, calculated logic. Months later, as his rival's brutal empire burns to ash, you and I can finally close this bloody chapter. The camera catches them in a quiet courtyard, watching the sun bleed below the horizon. They are entirely bound to one another. Their survival reveals a hard-earned lesson. True healing rarely means returning to a state of pure innocence. Instead, it is learning to walk in the dark without flinching. The violent aftermath of this Mafia war ends without the grand theater usually seen in the underworld. Instead, the heavy dust settles into a surprisingly quiet peace. Luciana finds her footing, finally breathing without looking over her shoulder. Roman transforms as well, choosing to rule his empire through disciplined order rather than chaotic terror. Serafina still carries the deep scars of her past, but she wears them as medals of resilience, not heavy chains. When Roman approaches her in the fading evening light, the usual dominance is completely gone from his posture. He offers her a simple, unpretentious ring. It is the breathtaking climax of their dark story. He has learned a profound lesson. A human heart only truly belongs to you when it is completely free to walk away. The air in the dim room fractured as Roman took a sharp, trembling breath. It was a sound defying every brutal tradition of his violent bloodline. The cold, narcissistic patriarchs before him would have seen this raw vulnerability as a fatal weakness. Yet, bathed in the soft shadows, Roman lets his heavy armor fall. He speaks of the poison surrounding them, his voice thick with devastating empathy. He confesses that the moment their eyes first met, his empire of cruelty began to crumble. You and I rarely get to witness such a profound surrender on screen. A man raised to rule through terror is dismantling his own throne, offering her a quiet, equal peace. Life teaches us that tearing down our walls is the bravest act of all. Serafina lets the agonizing silence linger, reclaiming her power. The heavy tension finally breaks when a weary, genuine smile touches Serafina's lips. She accepts his quiet surrender but adds a soft warning laced with humor. She promises that if his old, controlling shadows ever return, she will simply vanish into the night. For the first time, pure warmth floods Roman's dark eyes, sealing their unspoken vow. In the tragic theater of their lives, this incredible woman has completely rewritten the script. Tossed into a violent mafia world as a mere pawn, she waded through deep trauma and walked out unbroken. Roman realizes that the real danger was never a rival boss, but the terrifying prospect of living without her. This powerfully reminds us that our greatest resilience lies in finding hope. It takes true bravery to trust a love born from ruins. As the camera pulls back, leaving them in the quiet glow of the room, we are left to reflect on their story. I invite you to share this tragic romance with anyone who understands the unpredictable resilience of the human heart. You and I have walked through a twisted maze today, exploring the heavy toll of betrayal and the quiet miracle of survival. The human soul truly is an endless, shadowed hallway. If this story moved you, stay close as we turn the pages of more dark narratives. Our next tale will pull us deeper into the fragile, terrifying depths of the mind. Remember this simple truth as we part ways today. We must never look away from the darkness, because it is only by facing our deepest shadows that we truly learn how to protect and nurture the light.